Hello, my name is Caroline Framke. I'm Chief Television Critic at Variety. For this morning's Power Women conversation, we have an exclusive sneak peek at the highly anticipated fourth season of The Crown, which drops November 15th on Netflix. Joining me to talk about how it came together will be Emma Corrin, who plays Diana Spencer, the future Princess of Wales, and Gillian Anderson, who plays Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. These two actresses had the tall task of portraying two of the most famous women in modern British history. Their introductions truly changed the game, and they do not disappoint. So Emma,
Hi.
hi, so lovely to see you. Thank you for joining today.
You too, of course.
A lot of people are very excited for Princess Diana's introduction to the crown. I feel like ever since the crown began, everyone was like, here comes Princess Diana. So pressure on your end. But for you, what was your impression of Princess Diana growing up? She was one of the most photographed, documented, discussed women in the world, but you were quite young when she died. So what was your experience of her before the crown, and how did playing her on the crown change that?
Yeah, I have no living memory of her, which in retrospect, I'm actually very grateful for, because I think it made it easier with doing this season to kind of bring my own interpretation to the character, to her. But I suppose growing up, my general impression was just how enamored people were by her. I had a sense of the tragedy of what had happened to her, and also, I suppose, her spirit that people speak of, her being this very generous, empathetic person who kind of broke the mold of the royal family, I suppose. And then I don't know if it's hard to say whether it changed since I started playing her, but I suppose because on the one hand, like, I'm playing a character, and on the other hand, even if you do all the research in the world, there's only so much you can ever really know a person, But I suppose I have a new understanding and appreciation of like what she went through and the nuances of her experience.
Yeah, I think something that really struck me when watching the season, and is something I knew intellectually, but is interesting to see play out, is that she's so young when she first meets Charles, so young when they get married. So for you, how did you sort of prepare to play her as, a 17-year-old when she meets Charles, and then you have to play her through her 20s through this terrible marriage? How did you approach that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The youth thing really struck me, because I think I'd known about it, but she was 19 when she got married. And I'm 24 now, and I feel so young. And on a daily basis, I'm just always confronted with like, God, like, I'm making so many mistakes the whole time. And, we're all like still learning even now. And I think back to when how I was when I was 19, and I didn't have a clue. Maybe I thought I did, but I really didn't. And to think that something so monumental happens to her at that stage of her life, and she's really plucked from the normal trajectory of like how a person grows and evolves into this very extraordinary circumstance, into a very public and pressure-filled marriage. I can't imagine what that does for someone's pattern of growth, I suppose. But to be honest, I guess because I'm like, as I am now, I'm in the middle of those ages, I suppose. So I felt like I was in quite a good place to have an appreciation of both. And also it's interesting because obviously we film out of order. So there was a really interesting period of time earlier this year when we were filming episodes 9 and 10 and episode 3 at the same time. So I'd have days where I was like doing, when she was 19 and then when she was 28, on different days at the time. But I really enjoyed that because it made me have to appreciate and have to understand exactly where she'd come from and exactly where she was going. And so I began to get a really clear idea of those different stages of her life in my mind. Yeah.
Slightly different public impression of Margaret Thatcher than Diana. She's one of the most divisive leaders in modern British history. So for you as an actor, as a person, what was your impression of her growing up or being in the world, and what makes her compelling to you as a character to play?
Well, I didn't really have that much of an impression when I was younger. I grew up in the UK until 1979, when I moved to the States, and that was the year that she became Prime Minister. So I think most of my impression was from, you know, being older back in the UK and hearing the multifaceted opinions that people have about her, and getting, you know, better understanding through, you know, just how divisive she was. I mean, one of the things that I have found in playing historical characters is you know, to put aside all preconceptions and opinions specifically, and particularly in regards to Margaret Thatcher, in order to be able to start not just from scratch, but also because in making choices within scenes or within the arc of the series The Crown, one kind of has to have a deep understanding of how they arrived to those decisions, how the character was able to take the actions and develop those attitudes and policies in her case. And so much of that had to do with how she was brought up and the particular household she was brought up in, and the Methodism under which she grew up, and the fact that her father was an alderman, and the fact that she worked in the family shop, and she started as a shopkeeper's daughter and ended up as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You know, it faced with some pretty hardline, you know, both Tories and a strong Labour Party against her. So you know, that to me is where the fascination lies. Is, I mean, essentially, she's a self-made woman, and against all odds, the odds continuing into her political life, she managed to be the first woman Prime Minister of Great Britain. So it's got to be complicated. Right. Mm-hmm. And the fact that she was as divisive as she was tells you just how complicated a character she was, which is fine as an actor.
In that respect, too, I think the season really goes out of its way to point out that while she did break barriers, she was the first female prime minister, she really kind of resented being pigeonholed as that and actively rejected feminism and didn't want to credit that or with the fact that she got to do this. So for you, I know that that's not quite how you feel. That in this scene, the scene that we saw the clip from, she goes on to say women aren't fit for office, they're too emotional. So how did you square that sort of conflict while playing her as this? It's a very complicated set of contrasts.
Yeah, contrasts, except the fact that she, you know, as far as she was concerned, she was just putting one foot in front of the other and following what her passion was and what she knew intrinsically she was good at. The conversation about feminism in her world probably wouldn't have applied to her, I can imagine, given her mindset. And so, and we have to remember that in a way, because, you know, when you're filming The Crown, all of the characters are through the prism of The Crown. And so we don't really get that much into her politics. We get as much into her personal life in this season and her relationship with her husband and her children as we do into her politics. And we don't really enter into the battle about feminist or not feminist. Back then, the fact that she was even a prime minister as woman was enough, you know, for many to tick many people's boxes, I think.
So now I have some questions for both of you, which I'm very excited to have both of you here, since unless I'm very much mistaken, I don't believe you have a scene together in this scene. So
no, we don't.
So it's kind of fun to have you both here.
We were like ships in the night. It was very strange.
When playing a historical figure, there's often a lot of pressure to get the physicality exactly right. So for you both, how did nailing the physical transformation of Diana and Thatcher, whether through hair, makeup, mannerisms? How did that all contribute to your performances?
I would say for me that looking into her, understanding her mannerisms and behavior, and those like recognizable Diana things that we all know, like understanding where those came from and being able to justify them before I suppose embodied them was something that I really loved looking into. I would say that helped me more than her fashion, I suppose, even though I know that that's a huge part of who she was increasingly. And there is, it does help a huge amount. It changes a lot when you're on set and you step into those clothes. It's suddenly like the bit that seals you up into the character, I think. But for me, it was definitely like understanding the psychology behind why she, did what she did, why she lowered her head, why she looked up under her fringe, her behavior at any given moment really interested me.
And Gillian, for you, Thatcher is obviously, it's such a transformation from your everyday, the hair alone. How did that help you get into this?
I would agree, actually, with Emma in terms of the mannerisms and understanding the psychology behind her first, and getting the physicality right. And that clothes ends up being the cherry on top almost. And certainly with her, getting into that wig definitely helped. And I'm not sure about the clothes wise. I mean, certainly, walking in her particular shoes, for instance, I mean, never in my life would I wear any of the shoes that she wore. And so, walking in the way that I learned to walk as her, and then in those shoes just added so much pleasure and helped so much. And the particular really uncomfortable nylon stockings that she might have worn, that I swear they found in the bottom of a box in a Salvation Army, because I don't think they make them anymore. Clothes, she was really, really interested in her clothes and had been for the majority of her life. And I was fascinated by that most of her letters that she wrote back to her sister when she was in college have to do with clothes. And so much of it is about her spending within her budget, which is, fascinating given she was queen of budget in this country. But she would talk about the tiny little length of ribbon that she managed to pick up for like sixpence, that she was planning on putting on which hat that she had been given by Aunt so-and-so. And it was adding things like silk and velvet and feathers and stuff like that to suits that she would wear to, her Conservative Party meetings and etc., or out with a young man that she might have been interested in at any given time.
I feel like for both your characters, which even though they're worlds apart in general, the way they presented themselves and also the way that they interact with the royals, like the close of the season, I feel like really underline the fact that they are outside the royal family, that they are never quite part of it. And that's such a big theme for both your characters, that they can't quite crack this very strange little group of people and their strange parlor games and their hunting and whatnot. So for playing outsiders to this royal family, how did you both approach that? Did coming into this sort of established cast kind of help with that?
In that way, actually, coming into the cast was no help at all, because everyone was so welcoming that it was very hard then to find, play those scenes where Diana's, meeting everyone for the first time, or is, in the last episode at the Christmas celebration, having to feel like an outsider, because actually, from the get-go, everyone was like exceptionally welcoming. And actually, when we were all, on the rare occasion that we were all filming in the same place on the same day, I always liken it to like having Christmas with your family. By the end of the day, you're absolutely knackered because you've been playing so many games and having so much fun. yeah, to get into the mindset of those scenes was interesting. I think particularly for Diana, because it is part of her like journey, I suppose, that I hadn't probably realized before I started doing working on the Crown, was the loneliness that she felt and the lack of support, which I think was particularly poignant for her, because a lot of research I did, actually similarly to you, Gillian, was I was very fascinated in her childhood and her upbringing, because I think, like with everyone, you know, that's, you know, a lot of how you behave or how you are when you're older or as you grow up has to do with your childhood and your relationships with your family. And I think she speaks about it quite candidly in a documentary, and I think always did, about her sense of loneliness. I think when she's once asked about her childhood, she just says, I just remember feeling incredibly lonely. And I think her parents had a fractured relationship that meant that she felt incredibly isolated. So then I think when it came to, you know, dreaming of the person she was going to marry and those ideals of romance and Prince Charming, and what she looked for in Charles, who was obviously much older than her, I think was a kind of parental figure in a way. But it also meant that with the royal family and meeting them, again, she was expecting to be enveloped in this kind of, you know, this is going to be my new family. This is going to be like a lovely circle of support. And from the get-go, when she walks into that circle, she suddenly, I think all those dreams come crashing down around her. You very much see in episode 3 her like slow realization that this isn't quite going to be how what she thought. And then in that conversation she has with the Queen when she comes back from Australia, and the Queen is like, oh, I think we all know when you've been wanting too much attention and you love the attention of the crowds and all that. And she says, yeah, of course I do, because I get no support from all of you. So like, at least someone's supporting me. Yeah.
And Gillian, for Thatcher, she really makes sure to emphasize, as you said, that her father was an alderman. She's not from the House of Lords. This isn't exactly her world. And then when she gets, the Crown shows her sort of trying to figure out how to break in there and then ultimately being disgusted by it. You've played historical characters before, you've played, you know, royal characters before. How was playing this sort of on the edge looking in for you, and how did that help you play Thatcher?
Well, I think from my understanding, she always felt like she was on the outside. You know, it's an incredibly classist environment, and so I think she was very self-conscious, from what I understand. And part of her, you know, trying to fit in more, whether it's through dressing or through changing her voice or through sheer will, was about, you know, being heard, being listened to, being supported, and being on the same playing field. But I think she definitely was self-conscious about it. And she, you know, she grew up as a monarchist. And I think she was a monarchist till the end, even though the relationship with Elizabeth was complicated. You know, she didn't really have much of a relationship with any of the other royals, except, as we would see, you know, it would be state dinners or going to Balmoral once a year. And so her primary relationship was with the Queen, and I think that, you know, she believed very much in the monarchy, and that it served a very important purpose in the country, but that, you know, as long as they kept to their side of the agreement and kept themselves to themselves and did their openings of things, etc., and let her run the country, everything would be okay. And the minute there was overlap or any kind of persuading of or advice or speaking against, as we see in episode 8 potentially, that felt like the Queen was stepping out of bounds. What Pete has written in the second episode of Balmoral is, you know, on the one hand, yes, being disrespected and completely feeling, you know, that she really, really didn't fit, and that she was, you know, treated poorly. But it was mostly to do with how much she felt like she was wasting her time. I mean, the state of the country at that particular time, and that she inherited, and the state of the country for a period longer while she was in power, was really dire. You know, she only slept 4 to 6 hours a night, and she worked non-stop. So the idea that she would take time off to watch people throw cheese just confounded her. She just did not understand why she should have to be subjected to that, or why they would want to be subjected to that. I don't think she understood at all. And so that's what you're seeing there, is just her feeling completely trapped and looked down upon. I don't think those were two combinations that Thatcher sat with very well.
I did want to ask about how you arrived at that voice, because like you, I feel like I grew up hearing about Thatcher, but hearing very little from her directly. So, you know, when I hear her speak, when I heard you speak as Thatcher, it's always a little jarring because it's such an intense affect. So how did you make that voice?
I mean, a lot of work with a couple of different voice people. But also one of the things that you know, Pete was interested in from the beginning was that it still be grounded in a little bit of me. So it's quite easy to parody her voice and to go over the top in a way that makes it hard to then identify with. And I think what's beautiful about his scripts are that all of these characters, no matter what preconceptions we have or what our opinions are about them, they are human beings, and they are, you know, very often going through similar human situations that we lowly commoners are, and that is what makes a story so interesting. I think that we can identify in some way and imagine that we could have similar reactions or feel anything towards them at all. And so if you go too far into Thatcher, the screecher, or Thatcher, you know, when she gets into her particularly preachy voice, it's very hard to connect with her. And so it was also trying to find the balance of being Thatcher, but at the same time, but just understanding, I guess, so that we can get an understanding of who she was and how she operated and what was motivating her.
In respect to sort of grounding these larger than life characters in very real things, Emma, I wanted to ask you about something that I think might surprise some people who don't know Princess Diana all too well beyond the headlines, beyond the photos. This season goes out of its way to really humanize the fact that she had, she really struggled with bulimia a lot throughout her life, especially when things got extremely rough. So is that something you knew about beforehand? How did you prepare to play that? It's obviously very tough material to have.
Yeah, it's something that I had heard of beforehand. One documentary, which I was kind of the only one I watched because it's incredible. It's called In Her Own Words. It's on Netflix, and in that she talks very candidly about her struggles with bulimia, and that really struck me because I feel like today, if a celebrity or any actor or anyone comes out and talks about their mental health or struggles with bulimia, it would be spoken about widely and praised because we're still in a state where these things aren't really talked about and should be, because so many people struggle with it, and so it was amazing. I think it's incredibly ahead of her time that she was so candid about it. So for that reason, I was very keen to do that justice on screen, and also because I do think it's important that these things are represented, not only so that people talk about them and feel like their own experiences are being valued and understood, but also because I mean, in everyone's case, and it's certainly in Diana's, it's so central to what she was going through. You kind of can't do justice to everything that she was experiencing, certainly in our scripts, without including that, because it was so symptomatic of the emotional turmoil and all the suppressed emotions that she was feeling, but also it caused a lot of things for her as well. And when I read the script, I saw that they had put it, that Peter had included it, which I was so happy about. And then Polly Bennett, who I worked with on movement and character stuff, we did a lot of our own research. We reached out to charities and also read a lot of online forums and a lot of books from people who had suffered with bulimia. And then we went back to the script team and asked if we could, like, with their help, flesh out the scenes as well. So it was something that I think, everyone decided to bring to the forefront, which I hope was the right decision. And hard to play, harder than I had thought it would be. But actually, those scenes when she's binging food, and it's hard not to feel like it's real, because you can only act that to some extent. But also, I kind of felt so much like I was doing it for a good reason, that I felt it was important. So it was sort of fine in the end. Yeah.
So this is a curveball from that. This is a bit of a hard left from that question. But obviously, you two have owned these characters this season, but there are so many fascinating women on The Crown, and so many interesting women in their orbit and everything, that I was curious to know, if you could play any other woman on The Crown, who would it be?
Ooh, actually, really good question. My instinct, because I've loved her throughout all the seasons, would be Margaret. But then I feel like Margaret and Diana are sort of quite similar in the ways that, in some ways, in their personality, and also I think in the fact they were a bit of a rule breaker, maybe. So maybe that's two. You know what? Actually, for this season, Thatcher, I guess, because I haven't, we just did not cross at all, so I have no concept of. I've been watching some of the episodes, and because it's been so long since we did the read through, genuinely, Gillian, your storyline is such a surprise for me. I'm just like digesting it. It's the first time I've ever seen it. It's brilliant, because we just did not cross paths at all. And I think it's very interesting how Diana and Thatcher are so different, and yet I feel like this series centers Diana, Thatcher, and the Queen as examples of women who, although having very separate experiences of it, they're all struggling with this, or dealing with this, women being in power at a time when, or women having power at a time when that was still so rare, I suppose. So maybe Thatcher.
I think probably too, Margaret. I think Margaret would be a lot of fun to play. She reminds me a lot of Blanche Dubois, who I played. So it might be a bit similar, but she would definitely be fun. I think, the Queen would be fun. I so rarely play anybody who doesn't be opinionated and isn't, forceful somehow. The fact that she is bound to
serve,
is bound to serve, and to keep her feelings and her thoughts to herself. I struggle with, and so I'm sure it's fascinating to have to do that as a character. But probably Margaret.
Yeah, I think Margaret would be so much fun and very interesting.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, all these women, 3 very, very, very different women, and 3 women at the top of their, I'm going to say, game.
I really felt it when I watched the last episode, because how it works normally is that the characters don't really overlap. There's normally an episode specific for each character, but in episode 10 you get all of their narratives interweaving, and I watched it and I was like, whoa, because it hadn't occurred to me how much overlap there is in all of what they're experiencing, really.
And all dealing with it completely differently, and affected by it completely differently, just based on where they were born and how they grew up.
I guess
It's a
that's
good,
exactly.
it's funny because we were talking the other day about Handmaid's Tale, and how
Mhm.
Handmaid's Tale, you know, for the longest time was this feminist series that was
Mhm.
majoritively women, but it was mostly actually about women being abused by men.
By men.
And
Yeah.
actually, this series has so feminine, is so female
Yeah.
led,
The season is insanely
and
female
really
led.
has very, very strong, empowered, powerful, and you know, women who are effective in their own right, aren't reliant on men for their success, I guess.
It's a really good one for women in power.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
thematically appropriate for this event, so.
Yeah, there you go.
That works out. Oh, we did it. It came full circle.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining. I'm
Thanks.
excited for people to see the season. There is so much for everyone to talk about, and I wish I could talk about all of it much more openly and more specifically, but there will be time for that. So everyone get ready for season 4 of The Crown, and thank you again.